evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening here as part of the International Space University Space Studies program. This is the last panel that we're going to have as part of the International Space University program here. We only have, after that, 2 events. One's going to be about comets and another one about innovation. But this is essentially the past panel format we will have. And today's topic is going to be about innovation, which is an essential topic. It's the engine behind a lot of the technological advancements, and it's the thing that fuels the economy and job creation. So it's a topic of a lot of interest, of paramount importance. Before we begin, would like to ask Alicia Woodward from the American Embassy in Dublin to come and give a few words. This panel today is sponsored by them, and would like to ask her to give a few words, please. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be with you this evening. The U.S. Embassy has been thrilled to partner with the Cork Institute of Technology this summer on the International Space University. And as we were trying to decide which event specifically that we wanted to sponsor, this one, tonight's discussion, popped out at us. Because tonight is all about innovation. And when we think about innovation, creativity and innovation are at the heart of what it means to be both American and what it means to be Irish. This is the reason that at the U.S. Embassy for the last 3 years we've been doing a series called Creative Minds that brings together the thought leaders and innovators and creators from the United States across all kinds of industries, from artists and musicians to scientists and social entrepreneurs, to talk about their creative journeys and to share what they've learned so that they can help across industries. So tonight's panel really fits in well with the Creative Minds series. It's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to hearing all about the future of innovation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Alicia. Appreciate it. So the way we're going to run the panel tonight, we're going to ask each of our distinguished panelists to give a brief introduction about themselves, and then I'll be asking a question for each one of them, and then after that we'll open the floor for questions. So if you have a question, please raise your arm, and we'll have somebody bring a microphone to you. So if we can ask each of you, just briefly introduce yourself and tell us some background about yourself.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. My name is Steve Barsh. I'm Chief Innovation Officer of a group, Dream It Ventures. I'm based in the United States in Philadelphia. My background is computer science and software engineering. I'm a serial entrepreneur, and my favorite thing is to work with early stage companies and help them be creative, de-risk them, and help them get to market as quickly as possible in lots of verticals.
So my name is Yuji Sano from Japan. So I'm a program manager of Impact Program. So 5-year national program funded the Japanese government. And so before assignment program manager, I worked for Toshiba Corporation and developed laser technologies. Thank you.
Good evening, my name is Orla Flynn. I'm Vice President for External Affairs here in CIT. My responsibilities include research and innovation, entrepreneurship, our on-campus incubator, and all of our external engagement with industry and communities. My personal academic background is in maths, physics, and computer science, but I've had a kind of a checkered career because I was the head of the art college here in CIT for about 8 years.
Good evening, I'm Dimitris Bontolos, the CEO of Zero to Infinity. My background is civil engineering. I've been connected with the transport sector during almost last 15 years, starting for the ground, 5 years, 12 years in the airline industry, where I was the Madrid-Barajas Airport Director and the customer experience of IAG, where also the national carrier Aer Lingus is included. During the last 3 years, I'm involved with the aerospace environment and also being a global advisor of McKinsey in travel and transport sector.
Good evening, I'm John O'Dwyer and I'm Head of Digital Investments and Innovation at AIB Bank here in Ireland. My background originally in software engineering and moved to the dark side in finance, and I've been in banking for the last 4 years and a bit, most recently to help the bank set up a digital innovation practice.
Good evening. I'm Andrea Mills. I'm Chief Innovation Officer of Gusto Ventures, and I've been involved in open innovation for about 20 years. I've been scouting technologies in different fields, from early stage sources and primarily universities and federal labs, and then try to accelerate the adoption cycle for industrial players. So I've been on the corporate venture arms of companies in pharmaceuticals, energy, and software over the last 20 years. So I've seen different industries and different adoption cycles.
Thank you very much. So you can see tonight we have a very diverse panel, and actually that is the point that we're trying to bring tonight. So the thing about cross-industry innovation is we get to explore what different industries are doing in the field. What successes are they having? Can these successes be implemented and maybe adapted to go from one industry to another? What failures are they having? Can we learn from the failures from other industry sectors? Can we work on similar synergistic problems that are affecting all of us and work together and put our collective intellect to achieve similar solutions? So my first question is actually to John. You work in the banking industry. So I want you maybe to elucidate a little bit what innovation ideas do you pull in from the outside of your banking industry, maybe from divergent industry that you haven't typically worked with, and how are they benefiting your business?
Yeah, thanks, Omar. I suppose banking could be accused of being quite culturally insular, I think, particularly over the last decade. I think Paul Volcker said the biggest innovation he's seen in banking has been the ATM machine in the last 20 years. And of course, that was a mechanical innovation. And I think now really the big driver for innovation in our business is been driven by digital. Advances in digital, advances in consumer and customer expectations and how they consume their finances, how they want to be made aware of how they're spending money, where they're spending money, and where they can be best given advice for the amount of data that we have for customers. So I think starting with 101, you've got to start with the customer and the expectations. When I look at it from my standpoint, and we're trying to devise a strategy that works, that's practical for a small Irish bank, I've looked at lots of other different industries. I suppose I've got a pet favorite in that I like the publishing, because I think it's the one that we all can quite easily digest and understand. And I look at a company like Axel Springer in Germany, which was traditionally a large newspaper group, traditionally reliant on revenues from advertising revenue. And if you look at Axel Springer and how it kind of reinvented itself, in the early noughties, like a lot of corporates went on an acquisitions spree, but it complemented that with some really interesting things as well. And so I think in the period of like 03 to 12, they bought something like 70 digital assets across different subsectors of sectors they were in or weren't in, and that bridged that divide of the classic innovator's dilemma, where it cannibalized some of their existing product and where shareholders were saying, hey, what are you doing here? So they acquired a lot of assets that were probably alien to them, and they repatriated them back into their own business. But they created maybe 100 other businesses themselves in a mix of incubation and fostering more of an innovative culture. So I look at that, and then when you translate that back into profit and loss and shareholder value, which is what most large organizations get monitored on, a company like that, who was once a very, very slow and traditional company, where they're now just released earnings recently this week, which is 80% of their revenues are all coming from digital. So you apply that to banking, a lot of the, we were speaking earlier at dinner, a lot of the learnings are horizontal, irrespective of what sector you are. So, I look at tools like that and have used it particularly in the context of banking to see what we can do and bring a best of breed approach to banking and innovation in banking.
Thanks, John. I would like to follow on that question on the role of the government. As we understand, for example, in the space field, the government played a substantial role in developing the aeronautics field, and you can tell now it's a $1 trillion industry. And now, more recently, we have the commercial space flights, which is a new industry worth about $340 billion, enabled by the government as well. So UG being in charge program manager for the Impact program, which is about $500 million, that the Japanese government invested in to try to come up with new innovations and change the economy. So could you talk about maybe the role of government and how they're infusing innovation, how creating value and new value for the economy and creating jobs and so on?
Yeah. As you know, Japan has experienced the long economic stagnation after the collapse of the bubble economy in 1980s. So known as the lost 20 years or lost 30 years. So IMPACT is a 5-year national program funded by the Japanese government 3 years ago. And it is aimed to increase to develop nationwide and disruptive innovation as a top-down manner. It is very important. And so, and as you know, probably the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe announced the Japan revitalization strategy in the Diet session 4 years ago, and they established impact program to promote innovation through the high risk and however high return, high impact R&Ds. So this is a short explanation of the role of the impact program.
Thank you very much. Now, my next question is for Dimitris. You come from a very interesting background. You were the vice president for the Spanish national airline, and then you were director for the biggest airport in Spain. So coming from these big corporations where there's a lot of bureaucracy, and now being part of a startup as a chief operating officer, can we maybe give us a contrast about the innovation value and innovation? How do you bring innovation in small corporations, startups, and big companies, and how can each of them learn from each other?
Yeah, sure. As you can imagine, the environment is completely different. When I was 25, 26 years old, running an airport with 5,000 employees, strikes, 24/7. That environment was completely different to the one that I'm right now, trying to run an entrepreneurial space company in Spain, 20 employees, I must say, being completely fair and humble, that my current scenario is much more difficult. At the end, everything is connected with the dimension of your vision, your ambition, and the aspiration that you have. And when I was running an airport, I was in a large corporation, and I have the perception that my experience could be extrapolated to any industry. The boundaries and the constraints of a large corporation are limiting the potential of the individuals. At the end, any project, any goal has to be a common goal, has to be connected with a team. And the companies, typically, legacy companies with history and heritage, are connected to vertical silos where the knowledge, the potential is not able to be organized in a transversal way. And the current economy, all kind of goals connected with the demand of a customer that is really our boss, is requesting a transmission of asset and knowledge that has to be spread in a completely different way. The incentive that we had when we were in a large corporation were not connected with the sense of urgency. When you are in a startup and you are running your money, you are running the money of your investor, and you have amazing competitors trying to imitate you or trying to do the same as what you are doing in a different way. You are counting your life in minutes. You are trying to every day reinvent or speed up your solution in order to survive, because you are putting in risk your own money and also the money of others, and everything is a bit more complicated. I would like to transfer a positive also flavor to all of you that probably after this program or already in your own career are working in large corporations. I have the belief that large corporations right now are trying to receive, trying to be inspired by what is happening the economy of the startups in such different ways, with cross-industry innovation, open innovation, trying to embrace advisors, consultants. So they are really trying to discover the way to modify the rules and the view of rhythm that typically is not connected with the challenge of the nowadays. There is not a golden button or a magic stick that will allow to solve all those constraints, but I will transfer that in my own experience, it's completely needed to transfer a top-down message where the possibility to convince people that has been connected with the past will really percolate to the entire company. Break the brackets, trying to make an organization flat, trying to also tolerate the risk and the failure. Large corporation has more asset, more capabilities, and the credibility and the reputation is not gonna lose if you fail once. Probably you are entitled to lose more, to fail more than the startup because you can't tolerate that. And in my opinion, it's a tremendous the potential that large corporations have right now if they unlock their own limitation and their own constraints in order to achieve the goals of the market. We could continue digging about that concept, but it's really a contradiction between what the market is demanding and what many large corporations are doing. There are many that are really doing incredible things because they understood in advance the potential of embracing creativity, new ideas, transfer of knowledge, but they need to break bracket, to work horizontally and vertically, and have a major tolerance to the risk and to the failure.
Thanks, Dimitris. My next question is for Orla. Coming from an academic institution, what can academic institution do more to enable the students when they graduate to be much more creative, much more innovative, and be able to do a better part when they engage in the industry and their professional jobs?
Thanks, Omar. And I have to say, I found Dimitris's points really interesting in that contrast between the multinational corporate versus the startup, because in a higher education setting, I think there's a real risk, and I learned this maybe when I went to the art school, that when we define a curriculum according to the outcomes that we expect them to achieve, very often we put a limit on the amount of experimentation that students will endeavor to participate in, experimental activities and so on. The idea that failure is good because failure leads to really good learning is something I think that we may have stifled a little bit out of our curriculum, and I'm speaking in general about higher education. Possibly it's at second level or primary school level where really we should be starting to encourage and stimulate innovation before students ever get to third level. And I think maybe in primary school we do that, but we kind of crush it out of them in second level when we focus on the exams that are needed to get into higher education. So one of the things that challenged us here in CIT about 10 years ago when we introduced a modular curriculum, especially in the art school, was how do we write modules in terms of learning outcomes where your actual learning outcome really is that the student will have failed a lot and will have learned a lot from that failure, and how to write a module that describes that. So that's kind of one challenge that I think higher education organizations have in general. The other challenges, of course, are the challenges around working in silos. So you have particular disciplines, and people who are specialists in those disciplines really want everything to be crammed into the curriculum without leaving room for, again, experimentation, working with people from other disciplines, maybe for fun, and maybe for credits. So in CIT, actually, we've brought in a compulsory module that every first year has to do, and it's called the CIT module, Creativity, Innovation, and Teamwork. And part of that module, and the way that module is structured varies depending on what discipline you're in, but all of our students get an opportunity to investigate entrepreneurship as a possible career option. What does that involve? They get a chance to spend some time in our Rubicon incubator, and it at least opens their eyes to the possibility that when they leave, working for yourself will be an option. And about 2 years ago, our students won all of the Student Entrepreneurship Top Awards in Ireland. And one of the reasons why I think that we've been successful in this space is because our fourth year engineering students have a shared module with our business students on product development, which means that we have teams of business students working together with mostly mechanical and biomedical engineers, and they have to start looking at their activities in the context of what if you were going to run this as a business? What if you were going to start this as a company? So they have to start looking at business planning, and they have to start looking at presentation and pitching to potential investors and so on. And really those modules have led to a lot of success in entrepreneurship kind of competitions. And also the number of students who identify themselves as self-employed has gone from maybe only 1% to about 5% now in terms of our graduates. So our first destination graduates, we are seeing an increase in students deciding to become self-employed.
Thank you. Now I would like to take a look at the venture capitalist side of the house. So Steve, for example, you have a very fascinating portfolio of companies you invest in and create new innovative ideas to bring into the market. When you invest in a company, what are the main things that you try to look at so that you don't spend a lot of money, a lot of resources, and spend long time and then to find out that this idea wasn't good enough? Can you share maybe with the audience some of the techniques and tools and tricks that you have learned from your experience to de-risk a business, to de-risk an innovative idea that will result in a business early on in the cycle?
Okay, sure. A couple things we look at first before we de-risk it is, what exactly is the idea? A lot of people come to us and say, I've got a great idea. And the first question is, what makes a great idea? So we look for ideas that are breakthrough, highly innovative, and moving into a very big market. For what we do, which is very high-risk capital and venture capital in general, the markets need to be very big. Sometimes we see ideas that are very small markets and small applicability. That doesn't mean the idea is bad. It doesn't mean it's bad at all. It just means it's not something that venture capital can really get behind. So we look at that. We look at how big the market is, how innovative, and we look a lot at the team. Because in the world that we live, which is very early stage ventures, companies that are 1 or 2 years old, sometimes 3 years old, the team, the expression is, and I think it translates globally, you bet on the jockey, not the horse. You bet on the leadership team. On the side of de-risking, the biggest thing that we look at in early stage innovations, and I spend a lot of times with entrepreneurs thinking about this, is what are your key assumptions? What are the 1 or 2 things that if you're wrong, your business is dead? And I find a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of early stage companies and a lot of corporations that are trying to do early stage innovation completely miss that. They're wasting millions of dollars and tons of time working on things that really don't matter. They've got 20 plates spinning in the air when there's really just 1 or 2 things that are going to kill their business. So we try to get them to really focus. And then the last thing is we talk a lot about, we think about it very scientifically. Everybody in this room, hopefully early on in your primary school, learned the scientific method, right? You form a hypothesis, and you set up an experiment to prove or disprove a hypothesis. What we do all day long with our early stage companies is say, what are your hypotheses? Multiple hypotheses, and what are the most critical ones? And how could you set up an experiment to as quickly and cheaply as possible turn the assumption into knowledge? So that's what we do, is just try to focus and move quick.
Thanks, Steve. And my last question is for Andrea. So Andrea, you've worked in several parts of the world. So you worked in Europe, you worked in the US, you worked in multiple locations. So my question to you is, maybe can you elucidate and contrast the environment of innovation in different continents? How does one continent differs from other? Give us how are they similar and along these lines.
Yes, yes. I spent quite a bit of time across the Atlantic, so both in Europe and in the US, and sometimes working for a US company, sometimes for European companies. And so some of the differences in terms of innovation, they can be traced along, for example, formal R&D is very common in the US, and so also the accountability for that kind of activities is very clear and is very formal. And sometimes you look at the statistics or the numbers in Europe, and it's very low. And the reality is that there is a lot of informal activities that are going into R&D or product development or or improvements that are actually sometimes accounted under different lines, sometimes in production, sometimes in other things, and mostly for tax reasons, because the States is much more favorable to incentivize formal R&D with accelerated amortization and stuff like that. So that is one aspect. The other thing, and to some extent is a consequence of this, in Europe you see a lot less patents and a lot less IP protection focused than in the US, and both at incumbent level, so established players, and also startups. And that has some implications because a lot of initiatives, they basically stay inside, and so they are very protected, either with trade secrets or other devices, but it's the opposite of open innovation. So in the lack of IP protection or having IP as a formal structure, you cannot freely or confidently share in an open exchange, and so you tend to close. Another aspect of this is that in the US it is very permeable. The boundaries are permeable between, for example, academia and corporate careers, startups and big companies. So you can see people that are transitioning fairly easily from one domain to the other because they're following a path of evolution of a project or a technology. In Europe, is at least in the European countries that I've worked in, so Italy, Germany, France to some extent, is very rare. And typically either you are an academic or you are a corporate guy or you are a startupper or you are an entrepreneur, but you're not changing so easily. Then there is capital and access to funding. So in Europe, yes, there is several initiatives in corporate venturing, so companies that are establishing some resources for doing stuff outside and investing or co-developing, but the actual VCs are not that many, and primarily they are focused on early stage and seed stage investments. In the US, the story is totally different. You have a very sophisticated VCs and very abundant in most of the states, not just on the coasts anymore. Of course, Silicon Valley, of course, the Boston Triangle, but there are very nice VCs in the Midwest, in other places, and so there's a lot of competition for ideas and for getting the best startups. And so in Europe, it's kind of the opposite. There's more ideas and startups and people looking for money than money available. And so that's another issue. So basically, if Europe would develop a late stage and growth stage funding ecosystem, that will be great because they could retain here some of the entrepreneurs, some of the good ideas that instead, because of lack of growth, they need to go somewhere else to find the resources. And typically when you go to a US VC, the first thing they tell you, move the stuff here because they want to check what you're doing. So they don't let you be remote. Other stuff is, for example, the regulations also play a significant role. I've been working for over 10 years in healthcare and life science. The European authorities for regulatory approvals for drugs or medical devices are more straightforward than the FDA. So a lot of people tend to go Europe first with that regard. But the money are in the US. So again, you tend to have companies even from the US that are pursuing the European approval first, but again, the knowledge, the IP sometimes comes from there. And the other thing is the scalability of the ventures. Either if you are an incumbent, an established company, or a startup, Europe, even if it's Europe, on the monetary aspects with the euro, it's not Europe as a one market. So you have different languages, different regulations, different practices, different cultures. So in the US, you have over 300 million people that is pretty much homogeneous from coast to coast. So if you have a business model, if you have a technology, you can scale up in 50 cities just almost like in the same way. In Europe, forget about it. So you need to be selective in which regional market you start, and then having a sequential approach to go to market. which has also its own advantages, because in the States, either you have resources and you scale fast, so growth is the focus in the States, even if you're not profitable or you don't have zero revenue. There's a lot of companies that are unicorns on paper, meaning over $1 billion of valuation, not of anything else, and they have zero revenue. They're pre-revenue, nothing, but they keep growing and growing and growing because that's the only way you can survive. So if you catch the market first in the US, you have the chance to be so big that nobody can catch you. So first advantage of first mover advantage and growth. In Europe, the first thing they ask you is revenue, time to revenue. So again, and time to revenue could be in one regional market, so then you can be good in one market, but then maybe you're not as good in another market, or maybe there is an incumbent over there you cannot penetrate. So these are kind of the differences that I've seen in practice, and they could be, to some extent, across verticals, across industries.
Thank you, Andrea. So now the next segment, we'd like to open the floor for questions, and this one will be more interactive. So please feel free to grab the microphone and pitch in and express your opinion about any of these questions. Can't see it. Are there any questions?
Hi, good evening. My first question, for me, I would like to ask you, to be innovated is to be disrupt. The second question, besides have a big idea, is what does it mean for you to have a big idea? Is something that impact the society as well for the business? For the VC.
Okay, I'm Steve. I'll take that since it's kind of building on some of the remarks that I said. So first of all, what's a big idea? I think it depends on how you define it. I can say the way we define it is that it's going to have a big impact on a large market and generate a lot of revenue at some point. And I've told a couple people this story this week. I've met twice in my last 3 years, 2 pediatricians independently, 2 doctors of children, who said to me, I've got a great idea. And I said to them, what's your definition of a great idea? And they said, if it saves one child's life, it's a great idea. And I said, you know, you're right, that is a great idea. I said, unfortunately, venture capital couldn't fund something like that because that's not the world I live in. It really needs to impact a lot of people. So a great idea could have a huge impact on society. It depends on what's important to you. Venture capitalists are not judges, right? They're investors. So that's the first part of the question. The other part you said, what's innovation? And to me, innovation is creativity. Innovation can be along multiple attributes or axes of a company. Sometimes it's not a product innovation, it's just a go-to-market innovation, or it's a marketing innovation. It's this, we see often 3 or 4 companies doing exactly the same product, but one figures out a much more clever way to go to market and get customers. Like in the US, there was a Dollar Shave Club that came out with this great YouTube video and just took off like wildfire because it was the same product, same exact product, little cheaper price point, but very clever marketing. So the innovation could be, usually you see some level of creativity. There's some level of innovation, but it could be the product, it could be the marketing, it could be the packaging. There's a lot of different areas, at least in the companies that we do. If you talk to the space side of the world, innovation, again, can be very, very different.
Yeah, Andrea?
Yeah, I would like to add a couple of remarks also on the contrast between innovation in Europe and in the US in the light of what you asked. So in the US, for example, you find, especially in Silicon Valley, I would say, a lot of focus on disruption. So they tend to attack big industries, old industries, maybe protected by unions or highly inefficient, or plagued by either monopolies or duopolies. So basically, they want to make it big. Think about Uber, think about Airbnb, think about industries that are old many, many years. And on the other side of the fence, in Europe, you tend to have a preservation of the status quo, both at the legislative level, the political level. And so it's not that much about disruption. It's more about, let's say, incremental innovation, or sometimes it's sideways, so you have the old and the new that are basically trying to coexist. In the States, disruption sometimes is triggered not just because of good business or greed or whatever you want to call it, but also because the customer is king, the customer is at the center. In Europe, I would say, is not always the case, in the sense that you can see a lot of evidences that the customer is just a piece of the equation, is not necessarily the focus of the economic or political activity and concerns. But to answer your question, I mean, disruptive innovation is one type of innovation. There's a lot of great innovations with great impacts. They may be incremental, or maybe they repurpose assets in different ways. And so disruption is more exciting, is more sexy, is more attractive to kids or to young people, but it's also extremely difficult. And technically, it requires a lot more resources, because if you're disrupting something, you're disrupting typically something that exists and has been existing for a while, and is typically big and powerful and connected. So either you are solid, or it's better if you look for other kind of innovations.
Yeah. And it's interesting because most of these disruptions typically come from people's garages. So I think it's smart for big corporations to keep aligned with venture capitalists, to know what's going on a small scale. And because these could be strategic alliances that they form, and they acquire these companies before they become effective and probably disrupt their whole industry. So it's always good to keep a line of communication, understand what's going on in the market, who's creating disruptive technologies, and get them on board before they become actually an impact to your industry.
And this also is related to the mobility that I was talking about before. Imagine that a lot of big companies in the US, to my knowledge, in different industries, and that's been going on for quite a while, at least since I have experienced the US market, they disrupt themselves from inside. So Cisco was a great example, or everything. You have a lot of spin out from leadership at Cisco, for example, or other companies, and they go out, they do a startup that could have been a threat with that business model, with that idea, to the company itself, to the incumbent. And then if it's successful, then they have an option to go spin in again or go on their own. So if you disrupt yourself by design from inside, is a very powerful strategy, especially for big companies, to be up to speed.
Thanks. Dimitris, you had the point?
Yeah, I'm fully aligned with Andrea. When you were talking, came to my mind the example of a large corporation like the Nestlé Group, where they open a new category, reinventing the way to make coffee with the individual capsule. That was converted to a spin-off inside of the company that at the beginning had a lot of doubts, because it was not aligned with the typical type of venture that Nestlé was running. No? And in my opinion, large corporation and the entire community is a bit negative contaminated by the hyperbolic names like disruption, exponential. Many times the incremental benefit addressed to a massive market has more potential to a large corporation like to reinventing the wheel. If you are able to align large potential massive market, you are doing something that will be remarkable, but the percentage of failure in that scenario is really, really huge. So connected with the question about disruption, I think that many great ideas, many potential in startups and in the corporate arena are not really addressed to real problem, because everybody is trying to disrupt, is trying to make something remarkable without doing incremental tests that will reduce the potential risk, as Stephen was saying. So let's focus to one simple problem, and let's try to test if we can scale the outcome of that problem to a global market. Most probably in the meantime, we will have the possibility to introduce bits and pieces that will create that disruptive environment, but not thinking disruptive since the beginning. That's my
I think a prime example is also the smartphones. When they first came in, they were very disruptive, but we haven't seen the disruptions for a decade almost. It's incremental, that every year just a simple incremental that goes on. Steve, you had the point.
Yeah, I wanted to make a couple points about disruption and creativity. And that is, I have the benefit of getting to work with dozens of entrepreneurs from around the world, and it's a real privilege. I work with some very smart people that I get to work with. And what's interesting to us is sometimes people look at people like me and say, we only take people with domain expertise. Like what you guys are doing. You're taking a balloon to float it up to the atmosphere, to space, and then launch from there. It's very, very clever. And it's interesting because you see a lot of truly disruptive innovation come from people that are not from the industry. It's that classic innovator's dilemma. And one of the things that we look for when I'm talking to an entrepreneur is, what's your unique insight and where did it come from? Everybody's going left, but you're going right. And I like to look for that. So examples of entrepreneurs that to me are amazing entrepreneurs. Brian Chesky from Airbnb did not come from the hospitality industry. Travis did not come from the transportation industry. And Elon Musk, I don't remember if he has an aerospace engineering degree or a car degree, right? Yeah. But they just bring a fresh perspective that's unstoppable, which is really cool.
Absolutely. Orla?
Maybe just to add to that, I think I made the point earlier on about the importance in education of exposing students to working in teams that include people from other disciplines and ensuring that you have as diverse a composition as you can, and including cultural diversity as well. I mean, you spoke about Europe and the US, and I think the point that you made there about incremental disruption, very often the great big idea hides a whole trail of work that went on that's kind of invisible behind that. Yeah. And a big challenge for us is that when we're talking to our students about innovation is that idea that the more you practice, the better you'll get, and the more incremental work you do and the smaller the innovations you do, the more likely it is that your next one will be a much bigger idea.
Thank you. Okay, maybe we can pick up a new question. Okay, go ahead, please.
Thank you. Yeah, connected to the discussion, there's this notion about disruption and innovation actually happens within the intersection of two disciplines or two different disciplines, or actually also with the participation and collaboration of like two different stakeholders. I just wanted to ask, like, since you're all from like different either academia or companies or organizations, in your experience, what is happening today or that is actually being helped to propagate that notion of having those kinds of connections and disruptions?
In my opinion, I think it's important from the corporate perspective to break the boundaries, the pre-existing boundaries that limitate the possibility of that natural flow of the conversation that we are having. It's very difficult to sustain in many large corporations because we have during a lot of years create, again, vertical infrastructure that limitate the transmission of information. And the new ideas, those potential alternatives, those disruptive or incremental new line of business are always in the boundaries of the shared knowledge. And the shared knowledge is not evident in the organization. So breaking those constraints, trying to make that the information will flow in a natural way is quite important. And also something that is not evident and probably is connected with the implication of, again, disruptive and so on. You need to be patient. Disruption, innovation, the creation of value that probably will be addressed to a market for years, it's something that in many sectors require, like the scientific method, testing, analysis, attributes that are not connected with the type of life or the type of dimension that the market is transferring to us. So to be patient in a large corporation or in a startup is also not an easy task. You need to understand that your goal has the possibility to be achieved, but the path most probably is not going to be easy.
Yeah, I would like to add a couple of remarks. I mean, I totally agree with Dimitris about boundaries, because boundaries, they define the identity of the corporation. And so, I mean, think about Amazon. I was reading the other day an old interview from several years ago by Jeff Bezos, and he was saying, what is Amazon? And the goal of Amazon, the mission is to be the #1 in the world in customer service, in customer focus, customer centric. So it was way separated from the concept of being a bookstore or anything, and now you'll see it in the deployment of the strategy. The other thing, to come to your question, and I now provide some insights from having worked for several years with the sources of IP or sources of innovative ideas, university technology transfer offices or tech transfer of federal labs. And so you have either solutions in search of problems, so you have a technology or something that has been developed for whatever reason, and now it needs to be translated into something else because maybe the original, let's say, motivation for that technology to be developed has been exhausted, or you have problems in search of solutions. And so, and here we go back to the experts and the generalists or the vertical silos. Typically, one of the aspects of deficiency of tech transfer, at least in the States, for what I experienced, is that you have too much of vertical knowledge. So you have an inventor in a field, let's say physics or material science, and typically the associate in the tech transfer that is, as in the portfolio that asset, is also a PhD in that domain. And so they create boundaries to others in other industries to actually even see that asset, because in the database is only tagged with things that pertain to the domain that they know. So I give you an example. We licensed in the past assets that were originally invented. I mean, carbon nanotubes, for example, is a platform technology, can be done in a lot of things. And the assets that we licensed, they were only talking about, you know, supercapacitors, electrical applications, or whatever, aerospace, and we applied it in healthcare for delivery of drugs, and it was the difficult part. It was to try to find a common ground between us, in that case me, and the inventor, because we were completely apart. We didn't even know each other terminology to find a common ground. So the development of common knowledge and generalists will help bridge these gaps. It could be very, very interesting as a skill. The last remark, super short, think about innovation and metaphoric language. A good way to translate something out of context, out of the context of origin, is using a metaphor, a mental leap, okay? So basically you need to figure out what are the features, even in an abstract level, that actually will travel across industry or across an application. So you need to decontextualize the technology to be able to see it from a distance in order to understand what are the potential applications out of context. That could be very disruptive.
Thanks. And Yuji, based on this discussion, so what would you say was the biggest success that came out of the Impact program in introducing new technologies to Japan?
So, big success.
Yeah, the best success. This on.
Yes, in my case, it is very important to recognize what is the problem in the world. So after the recognition of the problem, we must the cause of the problem, and then we should find out the way to solve the problem. And in my case, the most successful result is to develop technology with gathering the talent all over the world. Actually, mainly in Japan. However, we collect the many talent from the academia and also the private company, and to organize a team which can solve the problem. So in the case of Impact, I am a program manager, and the program manager is given the authority to organize a team all over the world. And also, program manager is given the authority to handle the budget. So it is very important. So that's top-down manner is very important. This is the first program in Japan, and usual program is bottom-up. And another factor is we should have a wide range of the viewpoint. So if we are usually usually see in two-dimensionally, so the world is not so huge. Yeah. However, if you go to the space, we can see the three-dimensionally. So the scene is very different, completely different. So maybe this is the possibility of the leap of the thinking. So yeah. So
thank you, Yuji. Thank you. John, do you have anything to add to it?
No, it struck me just when we're talking about corporates and innovation. I think what's becoming more and more part of the lexicon of innovation and in corporates is just the whole notion that only the paranoid survive. And when you think about innovation, it's almost a synonym for survival as well. And we talk about different industries that go through different cycles and disruption. One would have thought. I know when I was in business school. Nokia was the leading Harvard Business Study case study of a business that was a timber business that was the leading handset manufacturer in the world, and look what's happened to Nokia. So I think just as a side note, I think innovation, certainly within our organisation, is all about survival and continuously reinventing what we do and how we can be front and foremost of our customers' lives who pay our wages.
Thanks. Take one more question. Go ahead.
We have a YouTube question from Space TV, and it is, would a private space company like SpaceX face more challenges in Europe than they do in the US? And if so, have those challenges hindered companies like Virgin Galactic?
Perhaps. Dimitris.
I will try to answer that non-political question. No? I think what is happening right now in US in almost a decade is starting to happen in Europe, and we have seen that in many economic spheres. No, probably the pizza deliveries and the postman started before in the US, and it's something that we have all over the world. I know that it was not easy for SpaceX to do what they have done so far, and I'm not talking about technical issue. I remember very well that after the Falcon 1 launch, the founder allocate in front of the Washington Capitol the rocket in order to transfer to all the political government a sense of pressure. No? They opened the market. They push a lot in order to demonstrate that that new way of doing business inside of the space arena was possible for private company, and that is happening in the new space environment also in Europe. I would say that Europe is a bit far away from that rhythm and for that more or less scenario, but they are trying to recover the situation. It's a bit more difficult because, as Andrea said, we require the alignment of many countries, many cultures, many regulations, and trying to answer to your question, that particularity of Europe, that is not one market, it's more than one market, will create a bit more difficulty for companies like SpaceX. For Virgin Galactic, I will say it's more or less the same. Virgin Galactic, as you know, have been split in Virgin Orbit and Virgin Galactic, two different typologies of business, trying to tackle in particular the space tourism, that is right now also a trend developed initially by Virgin Galactic, partially I will say by us using the balloon and with Blue Origin. On the early stage, space tourism will be connected with luxury, with something that will be also addressed to the high net worth individuals and so on. And in my opinion, those type of products traditionally has been connected with Europe, because Europe is bringing, particularly France and Italy, brands that transfer heritage, transfer like also the luxury cars, a sense of exclusivity that in US has not been unlocked so far. No? But I believe that the space industry, private space industry in the short term is going to be a global industry with international alliances. We are seeing from our perspective, being a small company with the headquarters in Barcelona, having alliances in China, in Japan, in Russia, in US. So the perspective of being American, of being European, in my perspective, in several years is going to be less important than which is your market and which is your service.
Yeah. And the fact that there is a lot of emergence of commercial space doesn't mean that there is competition between government, because each one will have their own space to work on, and the government actually is enabling a lot of these companies because there is value overall. So maybe one more question?
So it was mentioned that patents are more common in the US than here, and that the protection of intellectual property is very important. But don't these measures also face don't these measures create challenges for small startups? And how do you help to incubate startups, and not only in the US but also worldwide?
You had a good answer the other day about this topic.
So on intellectual property and patents, at DreamIt, we go a little bit light on that. I'm more worried that anybody cares. I find that 40 to 50% of startups die because nobody cares about the problem you're solving. You're not solving a big enough pain point, and your value proposition is not strong enough. So while I have a lot of good friends that are patent attorneys, we go a little light on that issue. We say we'd rather you go out, be careful exactly how you describe exactly what you're doing. You don't have to, you don't have to describe exactly how the balloon rocket works, to tell me, look, here's the value proposition. I'm going to bring this and I'm going to deliver a payload to space for 1/6 the price. Do you find that compelling? And I don't need a launch pad. Yeah, I got it. You don't have to describe to me exactly how it's going to occur, what's the unique intellectual property around it. So we go a little lighter on that issue because I don't want a startup wasting $50,000 to $100,000 filing patents and spending all that time. If you'll get a patent on something that's unique that nobody cares about and is going to buy. So I'm a little bit, we're not about writing research grants. We're not academic. We're very commercial. So we go lighter on that issue. If that answers it.
Just a brief comment on that. In our tech transfer office, again, we would see that we're probably behind in terms of the number of patents that we file in terms of our targets. And simple reason for that is that it is a function of money, and our preference is to focus on those, again, that we think will come to something afterwards. So for us, it's simply a function of money. If we had more income, we would probably spend a bit more on the patent side.
Thanks.
Yeah, and the other thing is with IP, it depends on the industry a lot. So for example, in life science, in healthcare, if you don't have IP, you don't go anywhere. And because of the cycles, because of the clinical trials, because of the fact that if it's a drug, it's a 10, 15-year horizon. If it's a medical device, probably 3 to 5 just to go actually on the market. So if you don't have a protection for 20 years or even the possibility to extend it even further with the derivative IP, there's no market, there's no economic sense in doing anything. Other industries are very different. I mean, think about Ferrero, that everybody knows, the people that made Nutella, is a multi-billion euro or dollar company based on a secret sauce, basically. So there's a lot of imitators or something, but nobody could match the taste, the creaminess, and everything. So there is industries and industries, and for startups, I think it depends again on the industry, but there is a lot of secret sauces. There's a lot of know-how, or if you like, let's say, knowledge that is interwoven with processes or fine-tuning of how to do things. And that's better to keep it as a secret, because the moment you patent something, you're basically revealing the secret sauce. I mean, think about also, is very far from technology, from this conversation, but food. I'm very passionate about food. I'm actually starting a venture in that. Food, I mean, recipes, top chefs, whatever, high-end restaurants, they're secret sauces, they're recipes. They don't have IP. And so they thrive on the secrecy and on the complexity of the knowledge that they were able to build based on trial and error. So my suggestion is, if you're a startup and you don't want to waste the money, you want to stay lean, or maybe you don't have that strong sensation that you can create an IP out of anything, just create a very sound knowledge base that is your secret sauce. And that is very valuable, because the knowledge curve could be very steep. So if you sell the fact that it took many iterations for you to get to that level of let's say, of performance or perfection, that's an asset, that's valuable.
Okay. So one more question I would like for you guys briefly to comment. With the advancement and creation, the value that artificial intelligence is creating, and it's becoming, more prevalent and prevailing in almost every single sector. So how do you think artificial intelligence is going to be impacting and helping in creating innovation in the near future?
I think that I'm kind of not joking when I say, we'd want a whole night maybe to talk about that, because I think there isn't an industry out there that isn't going to be impacted by artificial intelligence. Whether it's manufacturing or even in our services industry, our social media algorithms, I think there isn't an industry out there that, where on a personal level, or whether it's the products we buy, how they're made, how they interact with each other, how we interact with each other. I think there's a real, there's the potential future, which is very scary, perhaps. But then, you have the advances in computer science, and it's an exciting time, I guess, in computer science to be seeing what's possible. But I know that there was an ethics talk today, I think, in the SSP17, and I think that would be a real good topic for the ethics people, actually, in SSP17.
Yeah.
Fully aligned. I'm really excited about what we are going to see in the next 5-10 years, because, for example, I was hearing the other day that Adidas is considering very seriously, had taken the decision to move many of the factories from China to Germany again, thanks to the improvement of the 3D printing. But at the same time, they are forecasting the necessities of the client using artificial intelligence algorithms. If we extrapolate that example to the entire inventory of our industries, we are going to see a completely reshape of what we have known during the last mass production economy. And the most important question over that environment where we are going to live is, what can we bring to that scenario as human beings? What kind of asset, attributes, differentiators are we going to value? Which kind of elements are going to be teaching the academia in order to be prepared? Creativity is something that could be matched by the artificial intelligence. We are going to continue teaching those super high performance systems the way to solve problems in a different angles. My belief is that the community and the power of the shared human knowledge never will be beaten by the artificial intelligence.
Cool.
I think Orla mentioned the ethics around artificial intelligence and how it's going to impact, and it will impact every industry, I think, in the next 10, 20 years is quite frightening and exciting at the same time. I mean, there's a frequently quoted stat about the jobs that our 12-year-old kids will have don't exist right now, or 2/3 of them don't exist. What does that mean to all of the industries that we collectively represent here in Sage? I find that really interesting. In our own industry, we frequently have the big consulting names throwing things like bionic banking at us and things like that, which will surely make me redundant. So I think it's exciting and frightening at the same time in equal measure.
Yeah, I would like to add that there is a big focus on cognition and cognitive sciences, and so I think also the challenge for universities and also for lower level education institutions is to morph or to change the way they teach, because if you imagine a world with fast-changing technologies and cycles that last less than a career or a lot less than a career, you need to focus on what doesn't change. And so I would say that the only way to counter, let's say, to survive the rise of artificial intelligence for individuals is to be able to be equipped with augmented cognition, and so having equipped our brains to actually solve more complex issues under ambiguity, under uncertainty, under cultural boundaries. I mean, these are all things that a computer will take. I don't see any foreseeable future where a computer can understand cultural nuances or decide under uncertainty with ethical behaviors and stuff like that. And so I believe that there is definitely a shift, a tectonic shift in the way jobs and value will be created, and also it will be within certain domains and boundaries. Of course, certain manufacturing jobs are more exposed, certain repetitive jobs are more exposed, because think about it, a computer can calculate much faster and better than the human brain, but the brain can do a joke, can do a metaphor, can create a poem, can create a story, can create a narrative, and very adaptively. So the patterns that actually form in the brain are much more complex than any artificial or neural network you can imagine. And you just speak to people that know about computer science seriously, I can think about Jaron Lanier, stuff like that, they're the first to say, it's not artificial intelligence, is something else. It's augmented intelligence for human, or is maybe hyper-computational stuff, but there are various thresholds of performance that you can reach very quickly, and then it starts failing in terms of quality. So I'm not a big fan of, everything is going to be disrupted by artificial intelligence. For sure it's going to be a big factor within boundaries. And certain industries are going to be more affected than others, for sure. But and don't forget, the human brain evolves and adapts very quickly. And so the main challenge, I believe, is to change completely the way we learn, or the way we disrupt so we unlearn what we know. So the schools will have a fundamental role in this, in creating these kind of skills.
Thank you. Well, with this, we'd like to end the panel today. We'd like to give our panelists one more round of applause, please. And I'd like to give you, thank you. On behalf of the International Space University, I'd like to give you also a small token for your time and efforts here tonight. Thank you, EJ. Thank you. Orla. Thank you. And Dimitris. Thank you. John. And Andrea. All right. Thank you very much. And you can join us for a reception after this. Good night.